Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. The question of bail for people who are awaiting trial. They are accused of a crime. They haven't been convicted of anything. And then the question comes, unless they're accused of murder, the Constitution says you have a right to bail. But an awful lot of people will decide that they can't afford the bail, or they get out and then they run. And the question is, how do we diminish jail populations? Now, I have to admit, some of the question, I just don't even agree with the question. If I understand the Constitution guarantees the right to have bail unless the charge is murder, but this desire to simply artificially reduce jail populations by letting more people go, releasing them on their own recognizance or in much lower bails, doesn't make sense to me. There's a reason that you hold people in custody, both for the protection of the community and to ensure that the person actually shows up at trial. So I've invited Jeff Clayton on, who's executive director of the American Bail Coalition. And Jeff, welcome to the program. And as I understand it, there are folks out there saying we can use technological tools, assessment tools, actuarial tools to determine whether or not people should be released from jail instead of using bail. Is that the gist of it?
That's right, Lars. Thanks for having me on. That's been the linchpin of the quote-unquote no money bail movement for the last 4 years. That we could just simply use these computers to decide literally who stays in jail and who doesn't, rather than letting judges set appropriate bails as we've seen on this continent for 400 years.
Now, you pointed out that 27 prominent researchers from MIT, Harvard, Princeton, NYU, all the smartest colleges, say, look, you can't do this. Actuarial risk assessment doesn't actually work reliably enough. Is that the gist of it?
It is, and it's been a movement that's been building since last summer when 100 civil rights groups, NAACP et al., said the same thing. And finally, the academy is catching up, usually a couple of years after things actually happen, and saying, yeah, these are irreparably broken. They can't be fixed. They don't predict accurately, and they shouldn't be used any longer. And then they follow that up with 3 letters to different states saying you need to cease and desist, basically.
And so stop using that and do what instead? Go back to just traditional bail?
Yeah, they don't really give a roadmap for that, and I think, that's kind of where we've been the last couple of years, is we can work within the existing constitutional system to improve it, rather than doing what these no-money bail people want to do, which is changing state constitutions, eliminating people's right to bail, and giving it over to these computers.
Well, but and when you eliminate their right to bail, they're still going to get released. They're just not going to be released with any money security, right?
That's right. It's a yes or no question, right? So there's a huge burden on the prosecutor to prove that somebody should be in jail, and if not, everybody gets out. And so the reality in state governments is they won't be able to afford the hearings, so you'll see tons of defendants getting out under the so-called no-money bail system.
So what they do is they design a system that sounds to citizens who are hearing about this possible change that will still require them to do certain things, but knowing that you can't possibly have all the hearings and fulfill all the legal process, the default position, if you use computer language on it, would be then release happens. So you just get cut loose because the system is overwhelmed.
Exactly. It's a total smokescreen, and I think the letter to Senator Hertzberg on Senate Bill 10 sort of shows that this system doesn't work. It sounds good in concept, but at the end of the day, people on both sides of the aisle think it's a bad idea at this point.
What would be a good way of going about this?
So on our website, ambailcoalition.org, we have the 4th generation of bail reform, and we talk about reforms that can improve the system and return it to what it's supposed to be, which is appearance in court, guaranteeing appearance in court, and returning fugitives to court when they flee. And we need to kind of purify the bail system, go back to that, and stop trying to solve all the social problems that we're looking at when we're setting a bail bond.
I mean, let's talk about it realistically. Everybody focuses, and I know the news business, my business, focuses on the big deal crimes, like murder and rape and robbery. But if you take garden variety felonies, what's a typical bail that might be demanded of a man or woman to be able to walk out of custody until their court date?
Well, it depends largely on the jurisdiction. The reality is first-timers usually don't get bail, so it's usually repeat customers who've committed multiple crimes when judges start to put bails on them.
No, stop for a second, Jeff. When you say they don't get bail, does that mean they're just recogged out, they're released on their own recognizance, or that they're just told, you're going to sit in here for a while, you're not going to get bail?
Typically on a first charge, you generally don't see bail except if it's a particularly severe violent felony.
Okay, so they're released anyway with no cost.
Yeah.
And no security.
Yep. Correct.
Which might tend to lead them to say, well, then I'll just split town.
Well, right. And a lot of times they do these unsecured bonds where they forfeit an amount if they don't show up, which means they have an incentive not to come back.
They have an incentive not to come back. Who designed that?
Because they do that's the leftist unsecured bails, because it gives the feeling that we're doing bail on people, but we're really not. And so when they flee, they owe the $5,000 if they come back.
But they know
then we're never going to collect it.
What to talk about the way lawyers do, they're judgment proof. If somebody owes $5,000 and they've never had $5,000 to their name, they're effectively it's like me owing $1 million. I don't have $1 million, so you're never going to get it from me, right?
Exactly. City of Philadelphia was owed $1 billion under these policies.
$1 billion?
Texas go down the road now.
Holy cow!
$25 million in the last 2 years. So yeah.
That's not, and yet it almost makes sense that almost everybody should pay some bail. So if you told even the lowest level defendant it's $100, you want to walk out here, it's $100. You don't come in for court, you lose the $100. That would be real to them, right?
Yeah, I mean, not certainly. We don't need it in all cases, but in a lot of cases, we think it's appropriate that judges have that ability to do that and to guarantee that somebody's going to show up, and also, when they flee, to have somebody chasing after them. Now, and that's where the bail bond agents have private arrest powers.
I did interrupt you because I wanted that clarification of what you meant by they're given no bail. But you said a typical bail is maybe $5,000?
$5,000 to $10,000 maybe for a felony. In California, certainly they're a lot higher.
Now, if they go to a bail bondsman and say that my bail is $5,000, what do they typically have to pay to be able to walk out the door?
Most premiums are around 10%. Some states are 15%, and a lot of agents will take a payment plan.
So $500. So you have to pay the bail bond. Somebody has to come up with $500. You pay that to the bail bondsman. You don't show up. He's going to go hunt you down, first of all. But if you don't show up at all, then you owe the bail bondsman $5,000. And I have a feeling he's much more effective at collecting that than the government is.
Yeah, and also typically it's a third-party cosigner, right? It's usually not the defendant themselves that's guaranteed.
Your mom.
So, yeah, and then mom leans on defendant to go back to court, so mom doesn't have to pay.
Right.
And of course, we can go find them and avoid. So we're kind of jointly, severally liable, but we work together to make sure the defendant does what he's supposed to.
What do you think about the systems where effectively the state becomes the bail bondsman? I'm not that big a fan of it, but I happen to live in a jurisdiction where if it's $5,000 bail, you have to give them $500. You do owe the $5,000, but again, it's one of those where it's some deadbeat who owes $5,000, which means he doesn't really owe anything at all because he can't possibly pay it. What do you think of those systems?
Those are called 10% to the court systems, where the court acts as a surety. They don't collect the other 90%, so we call it a 90% discount bail policy. So they're leaving so much money on the table, and they're not creating the type of incentives that they need, because the defendants know they're not going to have to pay. Once they pay the 10%, they're done.
So they don't lean on the defendant for the $5,000 or the $4,500 that they still owe.
No, and a lot of states that do 10% just use it as a revenue generator for the courts, because they know a certain number of people are just going to not show anyway, and they get to keep the change.
All right, so what's the point of view of state legislatures about these changes and about whether or not they should go to these risk models?
It's pivoting massively, and I think what happened in California to go to the model really woke everybody up across the country. And so this year we saw it kind of settling down. I think next year we'll continue to see it settle down, but I think people are still going to want answers, and they're going to want solutions, and that's where we're coming from. Is there's plenty to work on without going so crazy that we're going to implement some new system and start changing state constitutional rights that have existed for 400 years.
Yeah, I think we should leave those in place. But I'll tell you what, Jeff, I always say naysayers go to the head of the line. So if somebody calls me and tells me, oh, no, we should let people go without bail, I'm going to ask them, if it was your dollars on the line and it was your brother-in-law or your brother who was going to walk out the door and leave you owing the money, would you be as confident? And if he's not as confident, then I'm not going to be confident either. That's Jeff Clayton from the American Bail Coalition.